Good morning. It is Monday, February the 22nd, and our week's focus this week in our daily Devo is the turning point, and by that he means the turning point in Jesus's ministry, and a series of things here we'll be going through the week. Yesterday on Sunday was Peter's confession, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Today's, on this Monday, is entitled "The Necessity of the Cross." He directs us to be in Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 33. The reading underneath the banner, "The Necessity of the Cross," comes from two of those verses, Mark 8, 31 and 32. He, meaning Jesus, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be killed. He spoke plainly about this. Before we come to the confrontation between Jesus and Peter, it may be helpful to fill in something of the historical background. For more than 700 years, Israel has been oppressed by the successive empires of Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Except for a brief intoxicating period under the Maccabees. At the turn of the first century, a number of apocalyptic movements arose whose leaders made wild promises. Yahweh was about to intervene through the Messiah, they said. Israel's enemies would be destroyed in a violent and bloody conflict, and the messianic age of peace and freedom would dawn. Galilee itself was a hotbed of such expectations, and some were focusing their hope on Jesus of Nazareth. Thus John records that, quote, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself, and that's in John 6:15. But Jesus had not come to be some kind of military Messiah, hence the command to silence. But now, once Peter had confessed Jesus as the Messiah, the disciples should be ready to learn about the sufferings of the Messiah. So Jesus, quote, began to teach them, it was a new instruction, that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be killed, Mark 8:31. Moreover, he spoke this plainly and openly. There was no need for silence. Peter listened aghast and then exploded, "Never, Lord! This shall never happen to you." Matthew 16:22. Peter would have been familiar with the figure of the Son of Man in Daniel chapter 7, who was given, quote, authority, glory, and sovereign power. It's in Daniel 7:14. So that all nations would worship him. How then could the Son of Man suffer? It was a contradiction in terms. So Peter was brash enough to rebuke Jesus, and Jesus now rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said, Matthew 16:23. The same Peter who had received a divine revelation had now become an object of satanic deception. Still today, the voice of Peter sometimes drowns the voice of Christ. For like Peter, many people deny the necessity of the cross. The cross is still a stumbling block to human pride. True that. I think in many times in history, and as well as in many places in the world yet today, it is understood that to follow Christ means, as Jesus himself said, that we take up our cross and we die to self. Every one of the disciples, except of course Judas, he went and hung himself, but the other 11 that we know something about. Except for John, they all died martyrs' deaths. That was the history of the early church. And and then a Roman emperor had a religious experience, and he decided he'd make Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. And now it became necessary to be a Christian in order to advance on the job, to advance in government. And all of a sudden, we didn't want to suffer anymore. We didn't want to be singled out for naming the name of Christ. And we lost our distinction. Israel and even Peter, with this rebuke of Jesus, were looking for a triumphant king who would run the government, would kick Rome out, and then be the one in charge. But that's not why Jesus came. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Jesus came to suffer by going to the cross. The depiction of the cross, read Psalm 22, you'll see a perfect description of what the human body goes through in the horrible, horrible treatment of crucifixion. Read Isaiah 53, and you'll read about why Jesus came, the suffering servant came. It's important that we understand that in this day and age. For many, Christianity has been painted as that thing to solve all problems, to somehow have all of our problems removed from us. Life will be wonderful now. It's a lie. It's a deception, as it was for Peter, as it was for many others. Jesus has a different agenda for us, for his people. He has a different way. And that's what we need to be seeking after, and not be confused by what others say, be confused, as we've already mentioned a time or two, by our own line of thinking that sometimes can be easily twisted. And so, Jesus is going to be crucified. He knows it in advance. He's trying to tell his disciples that truth, and they're having a hard time with it, just as oftentimes we do still today. Take up your cross today and follow him as he calls you. Amen.